But of course, this much anticipated state visit by the King and Queen comes after a suspected gunman at the White House Correspondents' Dinner event has appeared in court just a couple of hours ago as well, and he's been charged with an attempt to assassinate the President of the United States. Now, the suspect has been named as 31-year-old Tomas Allen from California. He was detained by Secret Service agents at the Washington Hilton Hotel on Saturday night, but he appeared here in federal court just a few hours ago. Now, just a glimpse there of the chaotic scenes at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday evening. President Trump was inside the ballroom alongside First Lady Melania, Vice President J.D. Vance, many senior cabinet figures and hundreds of journalists, nearly 2,000 people in attendance there on Saturday night. Well, the U.S. Department of Justice held a press conference a short time ago. The acting U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche listed the charges against the defendant after praising the actions of law enforcement on Saturday night.
Law enforcement did not fail. They did exactly what they are trained to do. This was not an accident. It was the result, as we know now, of preparation. But the men and women who protected us that night were trained, professional, and had an enduring commitment to the rule of law. Today, the Department of Justice filed 3 federal charges in United States District Court against Thomas Allen. The first count is attempted assassination of the President of the United States. This count is punishable by up to life in prison. The second count is interstate transportation of a firearm to commit a felony. This is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And the third count is discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence, which is punishable by a mandatory minimum term of imprisonment of 10 years, a maximum of life, and the 10 years is consecutive to any other sentence imposed.
Now, Janine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, gave more details about the investigation at that same press conference.
There will be additional charges as this investigation continues to unfold. But make no mistake, this was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, with the defendant making clear what his intent was. And that intent was to bring down as many of the high-ranking cabinet officials as he could. This is the kind of situation that we cannot tolerate. And as the Attorney General has just indicated, it could have been so much worse, but for the reality that we had the Secret Service, as well as the Metropolitan Police Department and the FBI.
Our correspondent, Shaima Khalil, was following the proceedings in court earlier, and she spoke to me about the atmosphere in the courtroom.
Even before Cole Allen entered the room, there was this anxious hum, if you will, this expectation of what it will be like when he walks in. In fact, Janine Pirro was in attendance. She was in the nearly full courtroom before she made an appearance in that press conference, and then silence as the door opened and Cole Allen was brought in by law enforcement officers. He was sat down next to 2 people who we now know are the 2 lawyers assigned to him. He appeared quite calm when he was answering the judge's questions. He answered his question when he asked about his age. He said 31. When he was asked about his education, he said a master's degree. And then he was listening intently and calmly when the judge explained the procedure, but also when he read him his rights. And then there was these charges. One, the attempted assassination of the president, Donald J. Trump, which, if found guilty, carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. And then the 2 other firearms offenses. One is the interstate transportation of firearms to commit felony, and then the other one is discharging a firearm in a crime of violence, each one carrying the maximum 10 years in prison if found guilty. Now, what was interesting and what came up actually, Katrina, in the questions after the press conference is a couple of things. One is that one of the charges that we'd heard about before his appearance was the assault of a federal officer. We didn't hear that in court. This was not leveled against him in court. And Todd Blanche was asked about that, and he said that they're still looking at that. But that doesn't exclude the other charges that were leveled against him. But I think also it goes into the more questions about these shots that were fired. We understand again from the acting Attorney General that 5 shots were fired, but we've also heard that that Allen himself has fired a shot from his shotgun. So there is a little bit of confusion, if you will, about how many shots exactly, who shot what, and if indeed it was Allen who shot the federal officer. We also understand from the acting Attorney General that there were multiple devices that were being recovered and being closely examined right now from his room in the Hilton Hotel in Washington and from where he lived in Torrance, California, in western Los Angeles. So there's still a lot of bits of evidence at play here. A lot is being examined. He pointed out the fact that this is a day and a half into the investigation. But again, I think at the heart of all of this is the concern, is the question about the level of security. Yes, the president himself and Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, and Todd Blanche all made the point of how well that security plan worked. The fact that Cole Allen was apprehended quickly, that these officers acted within seconds, and he was prevented from entering that ballroom. That is true. But to get as far as he has, or if you will, as close to the ballroom as he has, because it was just in the level, of course, as you know, you were there, above it, and then being as heavily armed as he was and having stayed at the hotel a day before, all of that is still unclear about how he was able to make all of this happen in the time leading up to the attack, or the attempted attack.
Let's speak now to former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. I just want to ask you about some of what we heard in that press briefing earlier with the acting Attorney General and the DC Attorney Jeanine Pirro. And she said there would be additional charges as this investigation continues. She said it was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, but also an attempt to bring down as many of the high-ranking cabinet members as this individual could. Do you expect we'll see charges around that, but once the investigation carries on?
Katrina, I do. And really today's charges were just a placeholder to hold Cole Allen in custody. And within days, and certainly within 2 weeks, the U.S. Attorney's Office will go before the grand jury and they will present additional charges. And those will be the charges that will be presented to a trial jury. Now, some of these charges already are very serious. They carry a potential life sentence in federal prison, including the attempted assassination of a president, the use and discharge of a firearm in connection with a crime of violence. But we know prosecutors like to pile on those charges, not because they add any additional prison time, but they can potentially bring in other evidence. And in this particular case, for instance, let's say the jurors don't find the specific intent to kill the President of the United States, but maybe another cabinet official or another law enforcement officer. That allows the jurors options potentially to return a verdict on other counts and to make sure that Cole Allen spends a lot of time in federal prison.
Now, he didn't enter any plea during the arraignment hearing today, but we did hear from the attorneys there. They were very clearly laying out what they see as his intent in terms of booking the hotel room in advance, travelling by train from Los Angeles through to Chicago and on to DC, and bringing the weapons that he had with him on that journey. What's the significance of them focusing in on that?
Katrina, it's highly significant. You're talking about motive, intent, premeditation. That's why that manifesto is such good evidence for the prosecution and will make the case so difficult to defend. Within minutes of this shooting, you have the defendant emailing his relatives and identifying his intent and his motivation for doing so. So when you have someone that essentially confesses to many of the elements of the crime, admits to these traveling across state lines, carrying the ammunition, even really mocking the security at the hotel there in Washington, D.C., the Hilton. I think you have plenty of evidence in this case, certainly more than enough to have probable cause to get that grand jury indictment, and likely enough to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt to a trial jury.
What is the timeline here, Nima, in terms of, how long this may take? I mean, we heard that this individual is now facing, if convicted, a life sentence and will appear for another quick hearing towards the end of the week. What is the path forward?
So, Katrina, these are the next steps in the proceedings. The first is a potential detention hearing that usually happens within the first 3 days, which is why we're getting a hearing on Thursday. There, the question is Cole Allen, is he going to be released on some sort of bond pending trial? I think it's very unlikely. Bond is only appropriate when someone's not at risk of flight or a danger to the community, and it does seem like Allen is a danger. The next step is a preliminary hearing, but that typically does not happen in the federal criminal justice system here in the United States, as long as there's a grand jury indictment. That indictment has to happen within 14 days if the defense doesn't waive time, or within 30 days. So in a matter of weeks, or maybe even days, we will have that grand jury indictment. And that is really the first step. That's the official charging document, not the complaint necessarily, that the trial jurors will see. And then the defense gets to decide what they do. Do they plead guilty pursuant to some plea agreement, try to put on some sort of mitigation type defense to try to get their client something less than a life sentence, maybe point to some mental health or other issues? Or do they dig in their heels and push the case all the way to trial? Because if it's going to be a life or close to life case if they plead guilty, and a life case if Cole Allen's convicted at trial, the defense may just roll the dice and say, you know what, maybe we'll push some sort of conspiracy theory that this was staged or something else, hoping that we might get a hung jury. So I think we'll know soon if the defense is going to go along the mitigation plea route or really prepare this case for trial. We'll probably have more answers in the next coming weeks.
Okay, Nima Ramini, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News.